The saga of trying to put these cheap steelies on the YXZ continues. Obviously, I shouldn't have bought these wheels, but this is how you learn stuff. I should know better by now, though. So, these wheels didn't fit in the back for a couple reasons. Mostly because they hit the upper control arm. You see that scratch there? But also because they hit this piece, and they also were a little narrow. So, ordered some eBay, or actually Amazon, cut my hand a little bit, 1-inch spacers. But of course, the problem is the only spacers that are on Amazon are for Polaris, and they come with 12 by 1.5 studs. These are 12 by 1.25. So the nuts they came with would not work. So I had to use some 19s I had off an older model that are 1.25 thread pitch. But of course, a 19mm socket won't fit into these hubs. So I had to bore it out. And of course, I don't have a drill bit that's 1 1/4 inches. So I had to make something custom by cutting the end off of a tapered drill bit to bore it out. Because with that end piece on there, it would have messed up the chamfer for the lug nut. So that is the modifications it took to install these on the YXZ. Now there are some M12 by 1.5 nuts you can buy, and I ordered some, but they won't be here before this weekend because obviously shipping doesn't work right now. They look like this. Unfortunately, this is a 1.5 and not a 1.25. So I ordered some of these. That's the right way to do what I'm doing now. But obviously you got to rise, you got to do what you got to do. All right, guys, here it is after way too much work. I've got the cheapo steel wheels mounted up on the YXZ with 20-inch Aztecs. In the rear, ended up having to run a 1-inch spacer due to clearance issues with the A-arm hitting the wheel. That's not something I really could have predicted. Stock ones are close. The offset measurements I got from Yamaha weren't exactly perfect. I should have had enough clearance there, but I didn't. So the 1-inch spacer actually makes it sit square. You kind of need it anyways because these wheels are a little more sunk in. So offset tolerances is one of those things where people say, oh, you know, it's a 2+6 or whatever. And it never is. It's always something in millimeters from the center line. And it's always an approximation on the website. So I really hate that. But knowing what I know now, I would not have bought these wheels. So I had to run 1-inch wheel spacers on the back, which is a pain in the butt. And then I had to modify them. I'll show you that in a minute because the lug threads are weird on Yamaha, and they use a very fine pitch 12mm lug. On the front, it was even more work. I'm running, as you see, a 5mm shim in here. I didn't want to go with the full 1-inch spacer because that would have made it a little too wide, although I may go to that eventually. In order to make that fit, I had to grind some of the fat part of the welds on the wheels and also clearance the brake caliper. And I'll show you some videos on that. Everyone's gonna say that's stupid, but whatever, that's what I did. I need to take it out this weekend, so you gotta do what you gotta do. I think about messing with the preload a little bit. I haven't jacked it up yet, but that's how it sits, just kind of coming off the floor jack. And it does still have some good down travel from there, so you could definitely crank this thing up. Not quite as high as a Talon, but it's got a lot of down travel to begin with, so you could crank it up a good bit. That's how it looks from the back. But overall, pretty happy with it. It's still really cheap. Those wheel spacers was like $50, so and the front ones are 20. So all said and done, it's still less than half the price of buying some alloy wheels for this thing. And the alloy wheels are really no lighter, and it's even less than half the price of beadlocks. So I did save some money, but definitely wouldn't do it again. I would just buy some wheels that other people say fit on the YXZ and do it properly, or buy some stock YXZ wheels and swap the tires. I looked for some stock ones. I couldn't find any around here, and I wanted to keep my other set mounted up for not mudding, right? Because this thing is not a mud machine. This is more just an experiment with these tires, so wanted to do it as cheaply as possible. And there was no new beadlocks I really wanted to test out. I was gonna buy the STIs for the 4th time. Already had a lot of sets of those, so that didn't seem to make sense. The tires are a little ballooned out right now. They still got 12, 13 PSI in them. I need to drive around some, make sure they're fully beaded, and then I'll air them down. But I'm just gonna go ahead and show you all the dumb things that did make these fit on here. I got the weights coming up for the wheels, the tires, and together, and yeah, and how I mounted them. So for those of you that like the long videos, a bunch of other stuff's coming. Everyone else, just turn it off now. That's the summary. The cheapest wheel available. These 14 by 6-inch wide wheels are on eBay for like, I think $35 a piece. And the 14 by 8-inch wheel was on eBay for like $50 a piece. So total, this was a lot cheaper, like a quarter of the price of going with the STI beadlocks right now, which are about 160 a piece. Got all these wheels for like 150, 160 bucks, all 4 of them. Look really nice. They're steel. Obviously, they look like a basic wheel. I do like this kind of matte military coat. It's like a tan color. Who knows how long it'll last, don't really care. And there's not really any markings on the wheels to tell you what the load rating is or anything like that. But, you know, they look at how they're welded and stuff. They're plenty strong enough for a side-by-side. Probably stronger than most aluminum wheels because they're steel. But the lips for the beads look good. And honestly, I haven't had a single issue with any Aztecs coming off the wheels or having leaks on the beads, so I'm really not too worried about it. I'll put a link for these wheels in the description. Again, they're on eBay. Just search 14x6 or 14x8. And of course, the lug pattern, this Polaris lug pattern on the YXZ, if you have a newer YXZ, 2019 and up, is 4x156. So, of course, what you're wondering is, they're steel. How heavy are they? Because steel wheels tend to be heavier, because steel is, you know, a lower strength to weight ratio than aluminum, which is why you don't use it in planes. Zero the scale. So this is going to be the heavier one. 14.5 pounds for a 14x8. That's actually really light. You know, the only way you can really beat that is to go with like a hyper. Most of the beadlocks are that weight or heavier because the beadlock hardware makes the wheel heavier, obviously. And the fronts should be lighter because they're narrower. The reason I did skinny wide is to match the offset on the YXZ properly without having to do wheel spacers. 12.6, 12.7 pounds. Let me get my finger off it. 12.5, okay. So, they're light and they're cheap. Ready, so there they are mounted up. Obviously, this one looks fatter than this one because this is on an 8-inch wheel, it's on a 6-inch wheel. And obviously, the one on the 6-inch wheel is a little bit taller. They have 12 PSI in them right now, that's why they're ballooned out. Obviously, you put higher PSI and then you go drive them around. With the beadlock, you drive it around, you retorque them, let them air out, repeat. With these, you just drive them around a little bit and then they're good to go. The next obvious question is, how do they compare to the factory tires, which are allegedly 29s? Well, they're a little taller. Obviously, we'll get a tape measure too, but so there's the Aztec next to the factory Bighorn. It's a hair taller. Once I lower that down to 10 PSI, probably about the same height. So let's get a tape measure and see how much the Bighorns are lying. I really do like the Bighorns on that thing for ripping around the yard. It's got incredible grip, ripping around the yard and doing things like Adventure World, but at Holopaw, those Bighorns are completely inadequate. And they're actually okay in mud, believe it or not, but in the wet, soft sand, they just dig holes and don't go anywhere. So let's see how tall these suckers are. Put it between. So the factory Bighorns are about really 28s, and these are right at 28 at this PSI. So once I lower them down, pretty close to 28, pretty true to height if you run like 10 PSI. If you run 5 PSI and these 28s are a little short, but the knobbies do look huge and gnarly because the tire's smaller, so relatively speaking, the knobby looks bigger. So this is the front tire. It's a little skinnier. It's about half an inch taller at the same PSI because of the skinnier wheel. Something we've discussed a lot. Put that next to the front tire for you. Similar width up here, but you can see the Aztec is a good bit taller than, probably 3/4 inch taller than the Bighorn. That's fine though, because it doesn't really matter off-road, and I'll probably run a little bit less PSI in the front than the rear, because, you know, the rear's got an engine sitting on it and the front doesn't. One thing to point out, because I'm kind of stretching these things onto 8-inch wheels and they're made for a 7-inch wheel, the lip of the wheel does stick out a little bit, just a fraction of an inch, or maybe a few millimeters. But you can see that the wheel does stick out a little bit right there. So it's got kind of a nice stance look. Here is the stock front tire, 29 by 9 by 14 Maxxis Bighorn. I'm gonna tell you the size right, I sure did. All right, and it weighs, tire and wheel, 39 pounds. That's pretty light. Pretty good setup there, Yamaha. And here's the mud tire, which is a 28 by 9.5 by 14 Aztec on a Steely. Tire and wheel is 46.8, so 47 pounds. So we added 8 pounds to each of the front corners, which is pretty good considering how much more traction we're gonna have. It's about as good as you can get. Also very cheap setup, also very smooth riding, also very reliable beads. Can't beat the Aztecs. Use my promo code. There's a reason I work with those guys. All right, so confession to make. Do not recommend installing these wheels. In order to make them work, I've had to grind a good bit off of my caliper, which it might look scary, but there's no lines in this part of the caliper, right? It's pistons are on the other side. So it's not super scary to do that. Some people are gonna say, oh, that's dumb. Why would you grind your caliper in your $20,000 machine to run a $40 wheel? Because I got to ride. And then I also went in here with the grinder and cleaned up the welds on this rim, so they don't stick out as far. And now it clears. I ordered some 5mm spacers. They'll be here tomorrow. Just throwing these on here for sizing them. These are 4mm. So when it's all said and done, I'll have 2mm of clearance between the caliper and the wheel, which is good enough. And as the brake pads wear, the caliper shifts that way. And these pads are still pretty good shape. So as I drive it, I will get even more clearance. Again, do not recommend buying these wheels. This is not worth the amount of work it's taking to clear them. Front didn't fit because of the calipers, and the rears don't fit for a totally different reason. They hit the upper control arm, which I've never seen before on a vehicle, but these are these really goofy control arms. And the reason they hit it is because even from the factory at full down travel, they're pretty close. And these wheels are slightly more negative. You can see how close it is there on the control arm too. So from the factory, it gets really close. So as you'd imagine with these wheels, it also gets really close. Just kidding, it actually touches. But that is torqued down, so I just need to put another 1/4 inch spacer there. Very annoying. Don't buy these wheels for a YXZ. Learn from me. Don't be cheap. Buy the right wheels. So that's how it looks on the YXZ with the 28s on the Steelies. I should have known better. I've run into issue with Steelies before. Because steel wheels are constructed different than aluminum wheels, there's some welds in there, and they're two-piece wheel that's welded together. You often end up with clearance issues, and that happened again, and I keep making the same mistakes over and over again.